William Birkin didn't become a monster the night he injected himself with the G virus. By then, he was already gone. Long before Nest collapsed, long before the outbreak swallowed Raccoon City, long before his body twisted into something barely human. Birkin had already given his life to Umbrella, his mind, his ambition, his identity, and somewhere along the way, the line between the man and the work began to disappear. That's what makes his story so tragic. Not just what he became, but how much of himself he had already sacrificed before the transformation ever began. This is the tragedy of William Birkin. Before the underground labs, before the outbreak, William Birkin was already one of Umbrella's most promising minds. He rose through the company young, earning a reputation as a brilliant researcher with a future that seemed impossible to ignore. And long before G ever existed, Birkin was already moving through Umbrella's darkest corners. From the research connected to Arclay, to the work that would later continue beneath Raccoon City. By the time he was established in Nest, Birkin wasn't just another scientist. He was part of the future Umbrella was building. But for Birkin, this was never just science. It was something deeper than that. Status, purpose, legacy. He didn't want to simply contribute to something important. He wanted to be remembered for it. And the more he disappeared into that ambition, the less room there seemed to be for anything else. That's where Birkin's story starts to turn. Because G wasn't just another Umbrella project. It became personal. In his own writing, Birkin talks about G as something that would surpass the T virus and change the future of bioweapons forever. And that tells you everything about where his mind was by that point. This wasn't just research anymore. This was validation, proof that he had created something greater than anything that came before it. Proof that he was right. Proof that he mattered. And once someone ties their entire sense of worth to one thing, losing it stops feeling possible. That's what makes Birkin tragic. By that stage, G wasn't just his work. It had become the only thing left that made him feel important. That's the part of Birkin's story people sometimes overlook. The tragedy didn't begin with mutation. It began much earlier. Because before Umbrella turned on him, before he ever injected himself, Birkin had already crossed every line that mattered. The research files recovered from Nest paint a grim picture of what his work had become. Human experimentation, implantation studies, mutation observation. Living people reduced to biological material in the pursuit of something greater. And that matters because it shows the truth about Birkin. He didn't lose his humanity all at once. He gave it away slowly. One decision at a time. One experiment at a time. One compromise at a time. By the time his body finally changed, the man he used to be was already fading. For all his intelligence, Birkin made one fatal mistake. He stopped thinking like an employee and started thinking like an owner. Internal messages make it clear that Umbrella had grown suspicious of him. He had begun claiming ownership of the G project. He had made unauthorized contact with the US military. And whether he realized it or not, he had become dangerous to the very company that had built him. But from Birkin's point of view, maybe that all made perfect sense. He had poured years of his life into G. His mind built it. His obsession shaped it. His future depended on it. So when Umbrella moved to shut the project down and remove him from his position, it wasn't just betrayal. It was the collapse of the only identity he had left. That's what makes this part of his story hit so hard. Umbrella didn't just turn on a scientist. It turned on a man who had already sacrificed everything for it. And in the end, the company treated him the same way it treated all its creations. Useful. right up until he wasn't. When Umbrella's security team entered Nest, William Birkin was cornered, and in that moment, everything he had built was about to be taken from him. So he made the choice that erased him completely. He injected himself with the G-virus, and that moment is what makes Birkin's story more than just body horror, because it isn't really about survival. It's about refusal. A man who had already lost everything else and couldn't bear to lose this too. That's why the moment works, not because it turns him into a monster, but because it reveals who he had already become. Someone who would rather destroy himself than let go. And that's the cruel irony at the center of his story. The thing he believed would make him greater than human was the very thing that took the last of his humanity away. That's why Birkin still stands out. Not just because of the mutations, not just because of what he becomes, but because underneath all of it, his story is painfully human. It's about a man who forgot how to be anything other than his work. A man who hollowed himself out chasing something he thought would finally make him complete. And a man who, when faced with losing control, chose ruin instead of surrender. By the end, Birkin isn't terrifying just because of how he looks. He's terrifying because of what he represents. A brilliant mind with no limits. An obsession with no off switch. A life consumed so completely by ambition that there was almost nothing left inside it. William Birkin didn't just create a monster. In the end, he became the proof of everything that was wrong with Umbrella. William Birkin wasn't just another Umbrella creation. He was a man who gave everything to his obsession and disappeared inside it. And that's what makes his story tragic. Because by the time the monster finally appeared, William Birkin was already gone.